Our next speaker, George Rowe. We're very excited to have George with us today. George has been an advocate for peace engineering since he very first heard about it, and as a way to frame the problems that we've all talked about, the wicked problems, problems of rural communities, of indigenous communities, of geopolitical impact, of technical impact, of environmental impact. And he's been become a real champion and advocate for this work and wants to partner and work with us and help figure out how this effort in his office, if we can help push this effort forward and how we can serve him. So George, thank you for being with us today. George is a senior engineer, and we look forward to all of the perspectives you have to share with us.
Very good. Just a quick comm check. You can hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, okay, George. Great. Well, I've experienced the classic challenges of Alaska. My internet dropped, so I'm talking to you from the data capabilities on my phone. So I apologize for any latency that might be resulting, and I am setting my timer because I'm very bad at talking too long. So first of all, our office is actually the Arctic Energy Office. Our mission includes security, but it also includes energy and includes a lot of science in terms of the focus. We cross-cut the Department of Energy, work with all of the national labs that have Arctic entities, including Sandia National Laboratory, and it's actually through Sandia that I actually learned anything about peace engineering. Mark Ivey, who's on the phone with us now, Lori Parrott, and others, Nancy Hayden, reached out and said, you might be interested in this. This might be relevant to the work you're doing. And I would say a very loud amen. So let me give you a little bit of context to where we're coming from at the Arctic Energy Office. So some of you may know this, some may not, but the Arctic is basically the region of the world where climate change is being experienced most rapidly and most significantly in terms of the magnitude of the impact. Unfortunately, climate change effects are not limited to the Arctic, they're global. And the uncertainties that go with climate change are palpable. There are communities literally falling into the ocean because sea ice is no longer there to protect them from erosion from winter storms, spring storms. I'm sitting in Cordova. That picture that you see in the lower right, that is where the Exxon Valdez had this very large oil spill wiping out the salmon fishery in this region with huge impacts to all of the stakeholders in the area, including the Eyak tribe here in Cordova, and then just the whole state economy. So the uncertainty with, are we going to have a future that we can drive toward, which is on the left side of this collage, which is natural beauty, sustainable energy solutions, cultural practices that have gone back millennia, broadly applicable traditional knowledge being applied to living? Or are we going to experience a future that is dominated by forces that are just much, much bigger than us? How are we going to engage? How will we adapt? There are threats, of course, but there are also opportunities, and we're trying to seize the latter to address the former. So in the Arctic, I say this is our shared Arctic. You don't have to live in the Arctic to share in the Arctic. The air that goes around the globe comes through the Arctic region. The waters that go all through the oceans of the world go through the Arctic region. Everything that happens in the Arctic affects some part of the globe in some way, through weather, water, food supply, etc. It's a situation that is not regional only, and so we're very grateful to be stewarding the engagement with this important region, with the mindset that this is not just the Arctic region, but it is an impact to the globe. There are economic things at stake. There are great power conflicts now that are evolving because as the sea ice retreats, the opportunity to access mineral resources that were previously not accessible is driving all kinds of interests. There are conflicts between people who want to use land in one way and people who want to use it in another way. There are just radical where are we going to move decisions because of the permafrost thawing or the massive erosion kind of things that are happening along rivers as well as on the coast. And so there's lots of changes happening, lots of difficulty in terms of these competing interests and needing to come up with resolutions that are equitable and sustainable. And so that's where we're trying to drive. And in the Department of Energy, what this means is that there are some fairly interesting opportunities for maturing technologies that are relevant to the space. So Sandra talked a little bit about solar PV, combining that with some affordable storage techniques and managing the load so that it can be consistent with the source of energy that's available. What can we do to help make those technologies more energy dense, more supportable, et cetera? And how can we work in the Arctic region to help transition these technologies, to harden them so that people in the Navajo Nation or people in Sudan or people in Bangladesh, how can we be sharing in these challenges and sharing the solutions? How can we make this technology relevant? The communities of the Arctic tend to be very small, except for 3 notable exceptions. Most of Alaska, if we look at that part of the region, lives in the greater Anchorage region. There's 2 other larger communities, Fairbanks and Juneau. Everything else has fewer than 10,000 citizens in a community. Many are below 500. So small scale sometimes makes it an opportunity to develop and check out technologies in ways that are much lower capital intensity. And the stakes are very high in terms of them working successfully. So it's a really good but challenging opportunity. So 2 summers ago, several of the national laboratories, including Sandia, Pacific Northwest National Lab, National Renewable Energy Lab, and I'm forgetting Pacific Northwest National Lab, participated together in a brainstorming through of different challenges that were facing the Arctic region and try to evolve out some key like meta-narrative issues. We developed 4. One of these is what we call the tracking and predicting the abrupt and disruptive changes that are happening because I talked about some of the examples, some of the hazards, that the impacts on the infrastructure, some of it highly critical from a national perspective, some of it very critical from a local perspective. And so the topics that we're trying to address here, one of the things that I think is not on the radar for some of the threat vectors related to environment is like as the climate changes, if you're in a region that relies on harvesting off of the land, out of the sea, it's not just the transportation corridors, it's not where the lines are going for moving electric power or where the natural gas lines are, is where the animals going and how are the animals changing and how is the environment changing so that the kinds of plants and other things that are growing are not as they used to be. And so we need to be bringing in this more holistic perspective that's related to peace engineering as we're thinking through these disruptive and abrupt transitions, because these are very significant to all the people of the Arctic, not just the indigenous people. Many people rely on harvesting local protein and vegetable materials. So toward that end, a second thrust that this group of laboratories in the University of Alaska gathered around was the need for understanding what is happening in a very timely kind of manner and understanding how different things, different data points might actually be coming together to help us see like a mosaic image of very difficult challenges. And these include looking at intrusion of species into different habitats, and they include intrusion of different nation states, different kinds of conflicts, whether it's who gets to survive, versus who gets the land. So there are lots of needs for data to understand this, to data to feed the modeling. One of the things that is a very strong reality is so many of the challenges that we have are being addressed by Band-Aid solutions. Oh, there's a solar PV grant, so people apply for that, but they don't look at some of the other underlying issues that, for example, so much of the North is not weatherized. There are like 1950s era houses built for operation in the lower 48. This is what families are living in, multiple families, crowded, poor ventilation, so very not healthy environments, and very high energy burden. In the lower 48 here, as a nation, we describe energy burden as about 6% of your income going for energy needs. In Alaska, it is unusual to be below 20%. And so this whole aspect of the cost of energy in these very challenging situations, this includes the Anchorage area, not just these rural communities. Everything needs to be addressed as a system. What you see here, this thing that looks like a tiny little bit of a runway there, that's called a boardwalk. And so this is an area where there's tundra. And so the ground is very mushy during the summer and it's frozen solid during the winter. And so people put these boardwalks above the surfaces. You see that long line, that's a vacuum sewer system that is basically trying to, it's collecting waste and it's putting it into a sewage lagoon. Many places use the honey bucket approach. They basically do buckets, human waste, and dump it in a lagoon, in some cases untreated. Terrible situation with respect to the perching of these liquid wastes on top of permafrost. As permafrost thaws, the contaminants will go into the groundwater, into the surface water. I talked about the subsistence reliance on local food. That's a very awful combination. So we need to be thinking natural system, human system, integrated system. And part of this, we need to be transitioning away from reliance on imported diesel, imported gasoline, imported heating oil, to more local solutions wherever this is possible. There's a wide range of capabilities that are evolving. The state of Alaska, for example, all of northern Canada, there's nothing but microgrids. Some of these microgrids are combined with one another in terms of interties. Some of them are completely standalone. So the challenges, though, are that we can't just look at energy. We need to be thinking holistically. We hear this word nexus. So for us, I talked about the integrated systems approach being needed. We need to talk about energy, which is just a tool, energy for the sake of clean water, wastewater management, shelter, looking at the food system, employment, economic opportunity. And then we need to do that in a way that's resilient because our climate is changing. Things are moving in many different ways very fast. And it's something that we need to be addressing. So these conflicts then go beyond what I've just talked about here, which are largely political and natural environment to worldviews. Who owns the earth? What's our responsibility in terms of stewarding it? Who has a right to develop this land or that land? What are the things that are like, don't go here criteria in terms like this is sacred land or this is not appropriate? We need to hear that from one another and understand how we can honor and respect that and move forward in ways that help us meet our shared goals. The priorities in the Arctic vary depending on where you are, whether you're in a small isolated rural area or in an urban area, that with which more opportunity, more interconnection, better broadband, exhibit A, here I am. Many of these priorities though are also shared. So we're trying to figure out those intersections where we're addressing the urgent and acute issues, but we're also looking at the more holistic, how can we move forward in broader based things? Economic development, driving away from dependence on fossil fuel in like the state of Alaska toward just a more diverse economy, huge effort. And I mentioned the great powers conflict. For us, sustainability has two time horizons. One, we have these very, very urgent situations that we need to be mindful of and address. But then we also need to be thinking seventh generation, as has often been used in some Native American communities as a phrasing. Thinking about what will we do in terms of the long run. We need to be recognizing that in addition to the natural threats that are upon us, there are some nefarious people out there, and there's accidents that just happen. That's a human threat. If you're relying on someone to do a particular thing at a particular time in a single thread, it's very challenging. And there's such a grant dependence in many of these rural communities, and that's very difficult in a fiscally constrained environment. When the Build Back Better, et cetera, funding does come forward, we need to be stewarding that wisely and using it so that we can create self-reliance and the opportunity to kind of keep our communities not dependent on these other approaches. And so toward that end, we're trying to engage communities as much as we can, co-producing knowledge, making sure that people don't give up knowledge or participate in experiments and things, and then they lose access to the very data they helped create. Sandra talked about energy planning, strategic planning. We need to work with people to make sure that their goals are clearly reflected and that they have a plan toward addressing those goals. How can we help build the capacity locally to address those? To what degree are their own assets needing to be supplemented, if they need to be supplemented? How can those around help in that regard? How can we make sure that technical assistance is not creating a dependence situation, but is empowering local people to help one another? And then having the federal resources that are like part of the system that I'm in, how can that complement what's locally available? In one of the funding opportunities that's on the street right now, the phrase community of communities is used. I love that perspective because I like the idea of communities working with one another. We're in the process right now of studying different communities in Alaska to see what are their similarities and what are their differences. Which ones are at what stage in terms of their development of energy efficiency, weatherization, looking at just general energy literacy, having local champions. That provides a great foundation for then bringing in other kinds of renewables. Some places in Alaska and other parts of the north, solar is a great resource for part of the year. Wind is a great resource in other areas, sometimes both. How do you use that? How do you manage your loads? I love this phrase from Africa because we are in kind of a both and situation. We need to go fast. In some cases, that means you need to take action locally right now, walking alone. But ultimately, we're in a marathon, not a sprint. That means we need to walk together. That means these communities could perhaps benefit by walking together. It means these communities may well benefit from looking at communities far outside the region. One of the things we're thinking about is what could like pueblos, what could towns and communities, gathering spots on the Navajo Nation, how could they and communities in Alaska, how could we work together in terms of things that we share in terms of the challenges, water, waste, energy. Okay, so we need probably more heat than is in most parts of the lower 48, except for the northern states. But it's still a thermometer that's connecting us. So if we got heat stress or we got cold stress, it's thermal stress. So how can we see the shared challenges? We need to address modularity. We need to make sure that the systems that we have are adaptable and can be tied together in different ways so that they meet fairly diverse needs, but we don't always have these one-off solutions in terms of trying to implement in this community or that community because it's just not affordable. This local capacity, I just want to talk about this one program here. This is the Arctic Remote Energy Networks Academy. This involves citizens from across the north that are basically energy leaders in their communities who never knew each other. So they're meeting with one another, they're building their own local their own capacities, but they're working on projects together so that they're sharing their plans, they're getting expertise, they're visiting communities to see what is being done where and bringing those ideas back home. And I'll share one example. I was in Colville Lake, which is the Northwest Territory, very far north of Canada. And I was there and I witnessed a woman in the program from a community that was maybe 200 miles away, saying to the people as we were there with the diesel system off, with solar batteries providing all the energy needs of the community in early March, snow on the ground, like they told me at home, this is not possible. They said it can't be done, and you're doing it. And so we need to learn from one another to see what is the art of the possible and struggle through the difficult things together. So working together is the path forward. Looking at the challenges that we share, sharing our resources, understanding the multi-vectors of social and food and not just single issue topics, I think is why I'm so interested in peace engineering. And I'm really hoping that we can find some opportunities to explore that are trans-regional. So I think that's within my limit, and I will stop sharing.